order the Housing Task Force meeting of May 24th. First of all, do we have roll call, please? Mr. Rao is...
Chair White?
Yes.
Roll call?
Roll call, yes.
Roll call. Chair White?
Here.
Commissioner Jordan?
Earth to chair,
I
right.
tried to help him.
Here. Councilmember Dominguez?
Here.
Councilmember Murillo?
Here.
Commissioner Campanella?
Here.
And Commissioner Olson?
Here.
And for the record, Commissioner Lodge is not here.
Okay. All right. I'm scrambling for an agenda here. All right. So we're having. Are there any changes to the agenda?
Not to my knowledge.
Are you our
I'll be the
secretary
for today.
Okay,
yes.
great. All right. Then for next are the minutes. Do we have any comments on the minutes, or do we have a motion for approval of the minutes?
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion by Jordan, second by Murillo. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Very good. So do we have any announcements for today?
Actually, I would.
Mr. Chair, I would like to ask that David Rao, project planner in housing, advise the task force as to the status of our RFP for the various studies that you have advised are good ideas,
Great.
Our economic and nexus studies.
Thank you.
Hi, as
Rao?
you may recall, the Housing Task Force approved the RFP to be issued for the nexus and feasibility studies, and the cutoff date was today. We gave the applicants 3 weeks to submit a proposal. We received 5 proposals, which we're going to go through and make a decision as to who to hire. And then we will be going to council for appropriation of the housing successor funds to pay for the studies. So that's the update today. Thank
Great,
you.
Thank you. Any questions?
When would we expect that at council?
The timeline has it July 11th.
Great, thank you.
Captain Noah?
Yeah, question on the, as far as the body of the report itself, one of the items that we're asking for is a summary of, this is the finished report. Nexus methodology used, thank you. Any legal issues related to housing impact fees or rental inclusionary requirement. Mm-hmm. So that's the finished report, and I was wondering whether in the RFP proposals or who we select, will they be discussing that up front if they have a concern, or how to modify things, rather than waiting until we get a finished report from one of the submittals?
I've had the opportunity to review 3 of the proposals so far, and all of them are offering to provide legal counsel on the Mitigation Act and inclusionary policy as we build the studies. So they'll be open to offering advice as to how we proceed, whether we can extract a housing impact fee or inclusionary. And it has to do with AB 1505, which is in Sacramento right now. It will, if passed, it will allow for rental inclusionary. And so they'll keep us updated on all the legal issues as we move forward. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rao. All right. So now we come to public comment, and on items that are not on the agenda. So Tom Becker, you're leading off.
Thank you, Tom Becker, representing Carther Basic. We want to emphasize to this board, we've done it almost every board that we talk to, your staff has got to start providing information, truthful, accurate, and full information about your projects, especially the federal government. Currently, Carther Basic has a complaint pending before the Federal Highway Administration over an MOU that was signed between SBK, the City of Santa Barbara, and the County of Santa Barbara concerning the intersections of Olive Mill and the San Ysidro. When we talked to the FHWA people who reviewed that, they were shocked to find out that those two projects are currently part of a lawsuit pending before Judge Anderley and a revised EIR. Your staff didn't tell them that. And they go, why didn't we know that there was a lawsuit pending that included those two intersections? They said, well, I guess you're going to have to ask city staff and county staff and SBK staff. We're on top of this, and we have very good connections at the Federal Highway Administration, very good connections Department of Transportation, very good connections at Department of Interior, and extremely good connections at Department of Energy. We are very, very much in support of Donald Trump's agenda. And because of that, and we've been very vocal in our support, we made friends. Unfortunately for you people, you haven't. Because some of your colleagues have been very, very viciously opposed to President Trump. So there's an old saying that you catch more flies with honey than you can with vinegar. And I might be a person that has a lot of vinegar, there's a lot of something else in me too. But with Donald Trump, we've shown that we're a friend, and we have gotten their ear, and especially with the Federal Highway Administration and some of the things your staff has done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Alex Peugeot.
Good afternoon, I'm Alex Peugeot, and this will be working here. Yeah, I'd like to talk on an item that is not on the agenda, but it's very peripheral to your task, and it has to do with housing. And it's the other big elephant in the room, which is the state mandate for ADUs, accessory dwelling units. As you know, the state has recognized the housing crisis and mandates these units, right? And I know that the city of Santa Barbara, like every other jurisdiction up and down the coast, is trying to find ways and write its own ordinance about how to accommodate that. And I would urge you, all of you, that are active in this type of thing, to take a different approach, to follow the lead that you took regarding bonus density. The state mandates a certain amount of density. The city said, I meet you and I raise you. The state mandates 35%. The city can go further. You can do the same with the ADU ordinance. The state mandates 1 unit, 1,200 square feet. The city could say 1 or more units not to exceed 1,200 square feet. If it's more than 1, they shall be affordable in perpetuity. You can do that. There are 4,000 illegal units in the city of Santa Barbara. I know where you are. You know where they are. This is a way to fix that, to legalize those units. And I hope you can take that opportunity. Thank you for the time. I leave you with the words of the greatest American poet. How many times can a man turn his head and pretend that he does not see? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peugeot. Shannon Clark, is it Batcher or Batchev? Batchev.
Good afternoon. My name is Shannon Batchev, and I'm representing the Coastal Housing Coalition. The CHC is alarmed with the recent discussions on establishing a 100-unit growth management ordinance for the AUD program. We are curious to know how this ordinance would impact goals set forth in the city's general plan, compliance with RENA, and adherence with SBCAG's sustainable community strategies. Both local and state regulators have recognized the need for more housing to be built near jobs and existing transit. The city's 2012 general plan, developed with extensive community outreach, encourages smaller rental and units close to transit, easy walking, and or biking distance to commercial services and recreational opportunities. The AUD was specifically designed to help meet this goal. Moreover, we are concerned that a potential 100-unit growth management ordinance would conflict with the city's obligation to RENA. The use of growth management plans that limit the number of units to be built in a year has proven problematical. Usually, limitation would conflict with both the RENA allocations and the city's general plan. It is also unclear whether subsidized affordable housing would fall under the limitation. If so, this would surely violate state law. The CHC is also concerned that such a limitation would stimulate the development of high-end or above-market housing. We urge more careful study and public discussion of such a proposal before it encounters potential legal pitfalls. Additionally, the Sustainable Community Strategies clearly states that Santa Barbara will not be able to achieve the Senate Bill 375 greenhouse gas emission targets through available transportation programs. The CHC believes that an ordinance limiting the number of AUD units to 100 per year would cause a major roadblock to meeting our local planning goals and state mandates. The Coastal Housing Coalition appreciates the efforts to ensure that the AUD program is successful. However, we again want to emphasize the importance of the AUD program in achieving the community housing goals and implementing key principles of the city's general plan.
Great, your time is up now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cristel Barros.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It's intimidating. Thank you for all you do and for allowing me to speak briefly this afternoon. Please excuse me for reading. I'm here today to ask, if possible, that you might consider the removal of the AUD overlay from the Flamingo and other mobile home parks. Our Flamingo Mobile Home Park is a senior park with most low-income and many disabled resident owners. There are 69 mobile homes there. Some of us are long-term residents. I personally first moved there in 1965 when it was designated as a family park. As some of you may know, our mobile home park is for sale. The ad as of today, oh, by the way, what I'm passing around is a copy of the ad as of today, or part of it, and then a page that just basically has what I'm saying. So, the ad that's out touts, quote, allowing for the development of apartments or condominiums at 15 to 27 units per acre. This allows for a potential of a maximum of 135 units to be developed on the property and includes additional incentives such as reduced parking requirements. Additionally, this listing agent appears to be doing business in Alhambra. I Googled the agent as his listing phone number was in the 626 area code. He's with Coldwell Banker, the commercial division. So clearly he would have no concerns or care about Santa Barbara or our folks. Removal of the AUD overlay on the Flamingo would, I believe, reduce the incentive to create a situation which would leave probably 80 or so individuals, elderly and disabled, homeless. Thank you for any help or suggestions you might provide.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Ms. Murillo?
Thank you. So, Ms. Barros, our city attorney is reworking our mobile home ordinance, and because that's a permanent ordinance, unlike the AUD, which is, in flux and experimental in some ways at this point. I believe it's better to be in the mobile home ordinance, and I hear you loud and clear about your concerns. Thank you.
Is that the same as the park closure ordinance, or is that a portion of that?
I think that's what you've been calling it. We're calling it
Okay.
Mobile home
I wasn't sure if
ordinance.
it was the same thing. Okay.
Great.
And
Thank you.
so would that be appropriately addressed at the meeting on the 31st?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And you have 3 city council members here listening to you. So
Okay.
Thank
And
you.
it's city council who's in charge of that ordinance. Is that right?
I think it's going to city council first, and then the ordinance committee.
Oh, okay. Okay, I get it.
Thank you.
And I think just to add to that, I would be in support of changing the overlay. So in addition to the protections that we've talked about, I think there are some customized things we can do. I think what we're doing now as a task force would be even more powerful in protecting the property, and there's a ground lease there too, so I think you've got some time.
Yeah.
But I think this is pretty comprehensive.
Okay, great.
And-
Yeah, there's so much more that I don't know than I do know. So.
And there is the task force will be looking at the geography of AUD sometime this summer. I can just say, so stay tuned, and hopefully we will have that announced as one of our topics of discussion, and that I would figure that to be applicable at that time.
Okay, so does it make sense that we continue to come just to keep ourselves informed about what's going on? Okay.
It would.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. Anna Marie, I can't tell whether you want to speak twice or not. Anna Marie Gott.
One's not on the topic, parking.
One's parking, and then one says on short-term vacation rentals, which hopefully that's more of a council item rather than...
Well, actually, the comment slip that I put up regarding the short-term vacation rentals was actually in request to the RFP that just went out that you guys are doing for the feasibility and economic study. You know, we have over 1,000 short-term vacation rentals that are listed online right now for the city of Santa Barbara. We have been unable to shut them down, and to give you an example, we have the highest priority of all the AUDs, of all the short-term priority, the highest priority of all short-term vacation rentals is right down the street at 522 Garden. They have the very first AUDs that actually received, their certificate of occupancy, and they have been rented out as short-term vacation rentals since that certificate. And we cannot shut them down. And we've given them a hotel conversion for the 2 commercial units on the bottom floor. We have a policy with the city that it doesn't seem that we're going to be able to meet our housing goals, because on one hand we have the AUD, which is build, 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 and on the other hand we've got city council members who are running to become mayor that want a short-term vacation rental ordinance that's going to take additional housing out of our housing stock. It doesn't make any sense, and I would like this policy and our implementation for the enforcement to be addressed and considered in your feasibility study, because I think that's, it's an elephant in the room. So that's my thing about short-term vacation rentals. You can call me later for parking. How's that?
Call you later. Well, okay, we're just about to start the parking discussion now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, that looks to be, am I missing someone who has something? Rob, is this for something not on the agenda then?
Correct.
Okay, please. Hard to tell from the note.
Good afternoon, Chair White, Housing Task Force members, Rob Fredericks with the Housing Authority, City of Santa Barbara. My comments are similar to Ms. Scott's. Last Friday at the Coastal Housing Coalition, Rob Pearson brought up the same issue of conversion of AUD units to short-term rentals. And apparently there have been some conversions that have gone through. There are other applications that are in the pipeline. And that just seems completely counter to the intent of the AUD program, which is to promote construction of affordable residential units. And I want to remind the task force of the city's 2015 housing element, which states the use of residential units as short-term vacation rentals and or occupied as second homes poses a challenge to the city because these uses decrease available long-term housing opportunities for local residents, as well as contribute to the increase in housing costs. So Ms. Brooke did mention that if a development is passed through the AUD in the high priority overlay seeking the highest density, those units are not allowed to convert to AUD. But I think it really harms the program if you allow any conversions under any AUD, under any zone. And I'd like to see that discussed by your task force with a recommendation brought forward back to City Council.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Fredericks. All right. So my apologies about comments that are not on the agenda, and I'm a little the notices here are a little bit confusing. So, Ms. Green, did you want to speak on something not on the agenda?
And while she's walking up, can I respond to Mr. Fredericks or ask a question of staff?
Yep.
Do we have something on our agenda on the task force to cover the issue that the last two speakers have brought up? Mr. Chair, with regards to short-term vacation rentals, Councilmember Dominguez?
Correct.
Yeah. With regards to the tasks that the City Council has given to the task force to consider, that was not among the list. However, as discussed in the past, as we go along and identify additional issues, I am keeping a running list that we can go over perhaps at the next meeting just to kind of check in. And these are additional issues that we would go back when we report to the City Council and advise them of these additional issues that have been identified and seek direction from them as to whether or not they would look to continue conversation among the task force on these additional items. And so the short answer is no. The longer answer, obviously, is maybe.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I sense some urgency about AUD and vacation rentals, and so I think two city council members should have a discussion about putting it on the city council agenda. But I would take your advice also, because I know our planning staff is so overwhelmed with work, but I'm very interested in closing that loop. Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Murillo, just as a point of clarification, you said that there's a sense of urgency with regard to short-term vacation rentals and AUD. Did you mean ADU?
No, I meant AUD. That was the topic, right? That we were talking about.
Mr. Pujo spoke to ADUs, accessory dwelling units.
Mr. Fredericks was talking about AUD, I think.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
So I think in the medium high density, they can go now technically to vacation rental. And yeah, some of us do want to protect the program. So
Amen to that. All right, Ms. Green, Naomi Green.
Well, I'm not sure whether this is on the agenda or not. It's two issues related anyway to what you qualify as your objectives, and one is on the question of fees, impact fees. And I was just talking the other day. I'm an East Side resident, and I was talking with other East Side residents. We have a little garden exchange, and they were surprised to see that there were no impact fees. We said in the past there have been, and what we would love to see is if there are impact fees, that some of them anyway go to community projects and or help community infrastructure. And one of the things that immediately came to mind at this little meeting was Ortega Park, which is kind of a thorn in the neighborhood. And they said, wouldn't it be wonderful if some of the development, if there were development fees, impact fees, and if they could, in a sense, render the park more of a neighborhood amenity. Right now it's a problem. And so that's one thing. The second thing, again, is to come back to the issue. It's kind of tangential to parking, but it's not parking. It's public transportation. Because, again, we're contorting ourselves to deal with parking. But there's really only one way that I see that you can do away with, not only one way, but the major way in which you can do away with parking issues is to have decent, really good public transportation, shuttles. Other cities have downtown shuttles. There's no reason we can't. We could tweak existing bus routes, for example, to have a shuttle up and down Milpas. That would certainly help. Or a shuttle from the middle, from Milpas to downtown. So when you're thinking about parking, could you think about public transportation before we all expire beneath the emissions of the cars? So right. Those are the two issues.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Okay, so I think that covers everybody who wants to talk on items not on the agenda. So let's take this back to staff and go to our agenda. Mr. Dayton, are you leading us on this?
I am. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, committee members, it is actually with great pleasure for me to be here, just reflecting a lot as we were preparing for this about 2011 and what we were thinking then, and having a general plan, and then developing the AUD program and not knowing what the responses would be, and the time of compromise on the council at that time, and coming together with those 5 votes. Just kind of interesting to reflect on that season, and then how parking inevitably played such a heavy role in part of the success. So
and let's start with, okay, so the agenda item is to discuss, let's start with what is the topic at hand. It is to investigate adjustments to parking requirements based on location, bulk, size, and scale, and desired outcomes. such as smaller units, units with fewer bedrooms, parking in lieu fees, or other benefits in exchange for parking requirement reductions. And I want to back up. I was supposed to make the pledge every single time, and the pledge is this. If we don't succeed at making changes to the AUD project that we're all happy with, we revert to the variable density ordinance. And I think that is a universally undesired outcome. So the work that we do today, as we're doing each one of these sessions, is to that goal. We want to have something that comes out of this that can prevent us from going to the variable density ordinance. So hopefully that will be the unifying ingredient that will get us all, with different viewpoints here, to come together with something that works well enough for all of us. Thank you, Mr. Dayton. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the Housing Task Force, as most people know, the council was formed by the City Council, and specifically today to look at the AED program, specifically today, as you said, Mr. Chair, parking. And the question that was asked is this investigation of parking requirements and how they should be adjusted to get to desired outcomes. And again, as I look at that list, it's not intended to be read. You've got it in your packet, but the amount of product that at least is proposed is very interesting from a staff perspective, being one who was there to try to tease out the market to have developers come forward and make those proposals. So now we're shaping, as you say, the program. The AUD program addresses many things, and this chart is really fascinating to look at in terms of, this comes from census data, and how many houses have been, housing units have been built in Santa Barbara and when, and percentages over time of the total. As it says in your staff report, I thought it was very interesting to see that 61% of the housing units were built at a time prior to 1972 where the parking requirement was, there wasn't a parking requirement, or the parking requirement was only one per unit. So 61% of our housing stock is already parked for a different era, so to speak. May play into some of the ways that Santa Barbara is rich in alternative modes. Looking at adaptive management, and that's really the goal, right? One of the things we learned over the last 20 years is don't wait to adjust the general plan program if you see issues. And this is kind of the heightened issue of the council, hearing fears. How could we make adjustments? And that's why we're talking about one of the things here today, parking. The one thing that we really want everyone to hear is that parking requirements influence residential project costs and size. They have a profound effect on projects. In fact, in land development, and this is Dan Gullett, I just want to introduce him as kind of the leader on the land development transportation planning staff and instrumental on the report that you received today. He's constantly receiving developer questions before they put pen to paper saying, how are we going to fit the parking? Can we reduce the parking? Where's the parking going to go? And so the parking and how you fit it on a site is commonly determines what you're going to put on the site, how many units, what's the commercial going to look like, can we even do this project? So we're often at the tip of the spear on those issues. This is an interesting graphic up here where you see a two-bedroom unit in comparison to size to two parking spaces, which are generally the requirement for two bedrooms. And the size difference, when we look at parking, a space occupies about 10 by 20, 10 by 18, and then the space behind it up to 30 is the maneuvering space. And then if you look at that in volume with 8-foot minimums, that cube, that size for every parking space required is a big cube that needs to be fit on site. And so when you change the number of cubes, it dramatically changes the equation for development. The standards, the parking standards prior to AUD is under standard. This is just an example 14-unit project, makeup project. Half the units are one-bedroom, half the units are two-bedroom. And here's the project requirement difference between what we have before and with the AUD program. And if the parking lot on the side, on the right is the design for the standard, and this would be the design for the AUD. So dramatic differences, nearly half of the parking, and again the cube, the size that you have to fit on site, is affecting the driving the design, what you can put on, where the buildings are going to go. Do I need to do a podium or not? Can I put it just at a parking lot, which would be even less expensive versus a podium? And the cost of that real estate for each one of those footprints, not using it for parking, can be added into a project, and then that affects the whole point here. That affects the cost. So when we look at an adaptive management strategy, the throttle here that's played a major role is parking. And so the question for the committee in our minds is, how do we adjust the parking requirements based on desired outcomes? It's not like we have a bunch of AUDs that are constructed. We don't. We have a bunch of proposals. We know the sizes. We know the bedroom proposals. We know where they're being proposed. So we do have a lot of information. But is there something about what we're seeing as being proposed that you would like to adjust? And what we've heard and responded to in the past already is we've heard that the neighborhoods largely are overparked. We've already learned in this presentation why are they overparked on the street. Well, 61% of our units in those neighborhoods, largely built in the downtown neighborhoods, only have one space or no spaces to begin with, so they're parking on the street. And so the fear is, will these AUD projects exacerbate that parking demand issue on the street? So what we've come up with, and go ahead.
Is underparked, you mean underparked?
Overparked on the street, underparked off street.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, are you allowing us to interrupt Mr. Dayton, or should we wait until he's done? Or?
I think you can ask questions.
Just ask questions, okay. So, but were you going to mention too that people have garages that they use for storage and not cars? And how that fits into our zoning ordinance?
I wasn't,
Thank you.
Councilmember Murillo, but let me do that. We estimate 50% of all garages are unused for the intended purpose. And, it's very, very logical when you think about it, because the cost of housing is so high in Santa Barbara that box we call a garage actually has a lot higher value for other things when you can park your car out front. So in answer to adjusting parking requirements based on what we've already heard in the narrative for council appeals, the reason for the setup of the task force, well, this is what you need to know. You increase parking, you reduce housing. If you decrease the parking requirement, you're going to increase housing. And that goes to say with your densities, because the densities that you've required sometimes are hard to get on the site if you're providing all the parking. Pushes the building too high. Reducing the parking actually makes it more, facilitates the architectural building of putting it on the site. And so we've got these policies that we always keep in front of us when we're thinking about this, and just want to keep them always in front of us. The one that I'm just so proud of, or to be a part of this community, Live Within Resources, which is code for sustainability. Turns out Santa Barbara knew that a long time ago. But the focusing of the growth downtown, maintaining the strength and viability of downtown, active living by putting jobs and housings together, mix of uses, things we keep in front of us. So here's a picture of the AUD map that we have online that community development's done that's really good. We've actually added the Central Business District line. That is an official line. It's called the delineated area for the Central Business District in the parking requirement code. So for the AUD proposals and what we've been hearing, for the concerns we've been hearing, that the neighborhoods with limited on-street parking There's fear about what an AUD, if it's only one space per unit, it's going to spill out on the street. We've heard fear about larger units, units that are 2 bedrooms and above, that they probably, the mindset is Santa Barbara housing is so expensive, we're going to put as many people as we can in there, and they're going to have more than one car for sure, but maybe it'll be even worse than that. So there's all these imaginations of what it might be. So in response to all that, and you've seen these before, but just showing you again, we've come up with this option for areas outside of, and it says areas outside of the CBD, that area. I think that you could think about this in your own minds differently than just a CBD boundary. Maybe you might tend to think about this as areas outside of commercial areas, or you might think about this as within the neighborhood areas that may be overparked on the street. And what this represents is our attempt to tell you what the parking demand will be in those areas on average. Sometimes less, average is an average, sometimes less, sometimes more, but this would be the average. And let me just walk you through it. We have something new, and that is the square footage of a unit. So we're saying if it's one bedroom or less than 700 square feet, if it's just less than 700 square feet, one space, greater than 700 square feet, 1.5, 2 bedrooms, 1.5, and then 2 spaces for 3 bedrooms or more. Actually, the Housing Task Force already dealt with that and sent a recommendation on ahead. So this represents, again, just to restate it, a response to the fears and kind of the intent we've heard in terms of parking. But I want to go, there's a question.
Okay. Where the 700 square feet, where does this come from? What's the source of this information? Because I haven't been able to find anything except the request to look at it. But what's the basis for that?
Commissioner Campanella, is a great question. This is based, Santa Barbara, to start off, is the parking demand rates are much different than the rest of the nation. They're different. They're lower. And so we can't rely on ITE. We found the same thing for our modeling data with trip generation for the land uses. So we've had to take our modeling information plus what we know about car ownership and really just practice over years about what the square footage of a unit will generate. And so when we look at our typical smaller units, we're more apt to find that one space ownership. And so that's where that comes from.
Right. But I guess I'll let you go on. But we have a lot of data right now on what the size of 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms are. We have many projects that have been submitted, applied, and approved. So, I mean, we could look at the database of what's a 1 bedroom and a 2 bedroom rather than coming up with some blended average if we wanted to be more exact. We have the info.
Right. Sure. Yeah, and that's your pleasure. We're just making suggestions. So, and aside from this, when we looked at this, I think we found something exciting, disappointing, just kind of like, whoa. I was just kind of hit when we were just talking about it, and that's this. When we did this program, the major thrust of this program at its inception was to get housing downtown. We did make allowance, a much wider allowance for the AUD swath, if you will, extending over to Milpas and the Haley Coda corridor, and then the specific plan area up in State Street. We covered all those areas, but the focus of the housing in terms of all the information we're getting from the model, which I'll show you, is that it needs to be downtown where the jobs are. So when we asked ourselves, well, how many are actually being built in the Central Business District? And these are the numbers: 33% of the total program, 5% on State Street. Those numbers seem pretty low to us in terms of our target and what we really thought. If we're really going to hit it out of the park, the place we would have wanted to do it is in that Central Business District. So getting to look at it, what that means, we've got some kind of visuals for you to show you in the census data, the 2014 census data. These are all the jobs, and you can see in the key, the bigger dots, how it gets to bigger amounts of jobs. When you show that side by side with workers, these are workers where they live. When you see it and you kind of pulse it, you just see this. The jobs are centered in downtown, and then the workers all around it. But you don't see a lot of housing for the workers within the downtown. And so that's a concern for us. This is the modeling area that, going back to the data that drove the push to focus growth and focus it in the grid and then also in the CBD. Our modeling area is actually bigger than our border. You can see that it goes out to San Ysidro on the right in the east, and then Turnpike on the west side. So it's a little bit bigger. Our modeling area was bigger than our city for good reasons for how we're modeling trips. The area in Area 1 was the area that had the most profound results in terms of how people behave, getting how they live and how they work. That's when that had the most profound results. Just speaking some other information that didn't include in the report from a commercial aspect, 1,000 feet of commercial generates nearly half the amount of trips in Area 1 than it does in 4 or 3. It's a huge difference. And so when we were thinking about Outer State Street and Coast Village Road, we call them, remember, the outlying areas, and we'll seem like outlaws, don't build there, focus it all on the core, and that's what we were talking about. When we look at some statistics from our model, and we look at the downtown employees, some of our more challenging statistics of people who work downtown is that 39%. 39%, almost 40% of the people who work in the downtown live outside of the modeling area, is what that is. That's a significant percentage of workers in the downtown. But the really good news that we received from the model was the downtown residents. 43% of those people who live in that area, Area 1, which is approximately the CBD, that Area 1, 43% work downtown. They live and work downtown. That is a huge number. And if you combined it with the 47 who live in the rest of Santa Barbara, now we're talking people who are working in a very, very close proximity to where they're living. And that has huge ramifications for transportation and also for the economy on State Street. The benefits of downtown housing, we just thought we'd throw them out here. Close to employment, this is what we found out. Services and entertainment. Minimizing the vehicle trip generation. In other words, you're not getting people moving in vehicles as much. The VMT, which is the vehicle miles traveled, how far people are going. Distances are much shorter. And then strengthening the downtown economy. Things that we're feeling right now on State Street as we're facing the Amazon.com era and brick-and-mortar retail not performing as much. The number of people who are treating State Street as a living room is critical for our downtown. So when we look at the policy direction that we have on the books, not new ideas that we're just coming up with in the last month, no. When we're looking at policy direction that Council's already adopted, this is the type of information that guides us for this situation. Facilitate infill housing downtown. Consider allowing residential parking in the public parking lots. Consider parking maximums and unbundling. Just in case you don't know what that is, a parking maximum is when you don't say to the developer, hey, you have to do this much. Instead, you say, you can't do any more than this, but any less is fine. So it's a maximum. It's saying we're going to turn the equation upside down. We don't want to have a lot of parking here because we want people who don't have those we don't want people driving out of downtown. We want to capture people in it and have them live, work, and shop. So we're turning the equation upside down. Unbundling is a concept. you might recall from the general plan discussion, where you decoupled the parking space from the unit in terms of rent or ownership. So that means instead of getting a parking space with your unit, you rent your unit on a monthly basis and then you rent parking. Well, what's great about this is that a lot of times people who may not need a car, well, we got this parking space in the garage, so we're gonna have one in case we go see Aunt Harriet in San Francisco or something like that, just because we're already paying for that space. Unbundling says, okay, I don't want to pay an extra $200 for that space because I can do without it. And then this other couple who has kids says, hey, I need two. I'm going to buy two. So within the development, you're more apt to get the right amount of parking distributed between the tenant and the building, the tenants in the building. So that's what that unbundling means. And then looking for housing opportunities on city-owned land. These were some of the policies that we saw in the general plan specifically for parking that we haven't really chased after. So all that's to say, here's our thoughts for you on the missing piece, which is the central business district the tap is not open for housing like we had predicted. These are some things when we talk about adjusting parking requirements to get housing where you want it, where you could consider. So the first one is the parking maximum. Maybe it's a one-space parking maximum. Oh, another thing that's really critical to mention that I forgot. When we did the AUD and we gave that parking incentive at one space per unit, no guest, the CBD already had that. So while all the other areas outside the CBD got a benefit, the downtown did not get that extra boost. So another reason why this recommendation may be important. So considering a parking maximum, again, maybe it's one, and then the developer could do as many based on the location, based on the product the developer's doing. It's the good thing about this is it's not a one size fits all. Maybe they only need 0.25. Maybe they're on State Street and we say, hey, we're not going to let you have a driveway anyway because we don't want driveways on State Street. That's across the living room. We don't want that. One of the things we were thinking about when we were putting this together and thinking about State Street housing is the retail space that's long and narrow is a thing of the past. So they tend to be shorter and not holding a lot of storage or items. So maybe the back half becomes something where the parking goes, and then you would need zero requirement to get there, and then it's a captive audience for the street. Another option to that or twist is the parking in lieu fee. So in that case, we would keep the parking requirement where it is at one, and then the developer would propose to reduce it with fees. So we would say, for every space that you're required to put in, it's going to cost you somewhere between $5,000 and $40,000, depending upon what we find out from the value of a space and what's the right amount, so we don't shut down the valve, but we get something out of it. And most cities use that to build other parking supply. Now, the good thing about Santa Barbara is we got 3,000 spaces that are largely empty at night. We don't have to build more parking for residential at night. We have that resource already in place. It's a management issue, but we have it in place. So what would you use that money for? Well, that could be for bicycle master plan things, or now we don't have an RDA, so maybe that in lieu fee goes to red carpet treatments on the street as they wear out. Something to talk about. So those are two options. And then the third one for inside the CBD is that we would manage the downtown parking facilities to allow residential use. So if someone's going to zero, they still have a need, maybe we could work it out. So trend in parking in downtown is on the weekends, it's less. Uber and Lyft are taking over. People are not driving intoxicated. That's great. The top deck at Ortega garage is empty pretty much all the time now. So there are options for residential in the downtown. And then the AUD options for citywide, we think you should consider these, and that is the any AUD that goes in, we feel needs to be excluded from the residential parking permit. So if we're giving, and the residential parking program is a $30 annual pass that a resident can use to park on their street if they have a 90 or 75-minute zone. They don't need to move their car except for street sweeping. And so if you're an AUD project and you're getting a cut on parking, we're saying, okay, that's because you have a choice to have, your behaviors are less vehicle intensive. We don't want to give you a parking pass to be on the street when it's already overloaded. And then require the unbundled parking to allow residents to choose the parking they need. So this would be an adjustment where we separate that and we say, hey, rent or sell the parking space separately. And then car share, just getting started off the ground, but has huge promise for meeting the particularly downtown, but neighborhood, their parking needs. And helping that. So we just threw that in as something. We're going to do that. We're in the process of doing that. So that's it. The only thing I want to tell you that I didn't put a slide in here, and I wish I had, but we took this issue to the Downtown Parking Committee. I felt it appropriate because downtown parking has a ethic, culture. We reserve parking for customers, not residents, not employees. And so before coming to you, I wanted to check in with them and say, hey, we're coming forward with this, what's your feelings that I could pass on to the task force, because they're probably going to ask. And the motion they made, I'm going to read it, it's very lengthy. The Downtown Parking Committee recognized the crucial importance of creating workforce and market rate housing units around and on top of our downtown core. Those residents will likely be customers and employees who will support the objectives of the PBIA, that's the business improvement area, ensuring the long-term vibrancy and economic vitality of the heart of our city. Furthermore, the DPC recognizes the important role parking strategies play in good planning and development. It is the DPC's desire to work with the staff to help you think through sound, supportable parking strategies to improve the AED program. We need housing not just because we have a community-wide shortage, but because we believe housing is critical to the survival of our downtown core. Long motion, lots of typing. So that is our presentation, and this is kind of new, and these are options from our policy deck, but for your discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Dayton.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
I just want to say that Trey Penner from the Downtown Parking Committee is here, and
Great.
also Matt Labrie.
Good, thanks. Welcome, Trey. And a big point. Hi. Mr. Dominguez?
Regarding the last slide, the exclude AUD projects from the residential parking program. So to make sure I understand that, essentially the central business district is zone 1. If you live there, you wouldn't be able to park in there during the daytime other than the 90 or 75-minute limit?
That's correct. It's on either side of State Street, there are zones. There's 8 of them in the downtown, and you get the permit, and then you don't have to move. You can go beyond the limit. And at night, at 5 o'clock, anyone can park. But we think that it's such a discouragement because downtown dwellers don't generally move their cars very much unless they have a job, somewhere else, and that's right, and it works out for them. So it would be too hard for them to, endure that ticket issuing without that AUD. It's kind of like a self-enforcement that it says this is not a driving culture where you own a car if you're going to be in an underparked unit.
So the 43% of downtown residents who currently work downtown, they would be grandfathered in because they're not in an AUD project.
Yeah, that's right. They would, if you're, the way we've been doing it is projects that go through Planning Commission. We kind of already do this a little bit. Projects that go through Planning Commission that are housing, that are in an area that is permanent parking, we put on the conditions of approval that they can't get them because we're assuming that the project's providing all the parking. And the program is designed to protect residents that are underparked from those, 61%. Pre-1972, from having their parking taken from employees who are parking in the neighborhoods, because that was another decision we made. when we created the downtown parking district. We said, hey, we're going to serve customers, and we're not going to serve employees, and so we better create this program because the residents are going to come unglued. And that's exactly how it went down in 1981.
Okay. And then the other two things I had is it seems like the presentation is largely income neutral, or it doesn't give us much data, a lot of good facts and a lot of good stats, but it doesn't really tell us, doesn't paint the picture that incomes would paint, or what part of the workforce people are in. One of the things that crept up into the AUD, which I think has been a consternation, is the fact that people at the income levels that the rents being charged require to live there are wedded to their cars. So, for example, a project on Upper State Street, if the rent's $2,500 to $3,000 a month, you're going to need to be making $60,000 to $100,000. Those people very rarely take the bus, if ever. In fact, our overall public transportation participation rate for the city for renters is 6%. So it's unrealistic to expect many of this new cohort to be taking the bus unless we really increase the amenities of the bus service, or by the other side of the coin, we increase the costs and increase the inconvenience of driving and parking, which no one really wants to do. So the income piece of this presentation I'd love to see presented more, and then also, same end of the word, outcome. The outcomes you've alluded to are generally the general plan outcomes, which is great. The problem is the general plan is very general, and there's all sorts of outcomes in there, and some of them are even contradictory at certain points, particularly when you're trying to apply new policies to a new area that wasn't contemplated by the general plan. So what that says to me is, hey, it's time to redo the general plan. So it's May 24th, 2017. I think it's time to redo the general plan. I know it came in five or 6 years ago, and Ms. Bashef, I think, talked about community involvement. There was great community involvement there. And remind me, how long did that community involvement, was that like an 8 or 9 year process?
Keeps getting longer.
I've heard people, it seems to stretch over time. But
it was 4 years with a year off.
So that goes back that's more than a decade ago when that started. Is that correct? 2006?
Nearly, yeah. So we took the traffic counts in 8, so yeah, the process was largely between 8 and 11.
So even the Soviets only did a 5-year master plan. So at this point, a lot of that data, a lot of the assumptions we made are really not serving us. So I think that may be something we look at. I think that the outcome that you've adjusted, and is kind of the implicit outcome, so please correct me if I'm wrong, is kind of a net zero parking for some of our new building. So you put in a building, whether it's 1 unit or 20 units, the goal is to not have a bunch of parking impacts on the street. Maybe the street right in front of that building and the parking lot they build will accommodate the parking, but we don't want to have a big net impact, whether it's downtown or on the east side or Samarkand. Is that kind of the implicit message of your outcome in this design?
I think so. I think the recommendations that we have for outside the CBD or in other areas in the neighborhoods that we're feeling, I think that answer is, hey, if you want to meet demand, these are the numbers. But I think in the transportation world, this division is not too concerned about that, while we totally get that. Particularly when we did the bicycle master plan in the Mitchell Traina area, we went out and counted cars, and it was very, very interesting. Over 30% of the cars parked on Mitchell Traina never moved because most people are walking and biking to work, and they're holding on to the car for that trip where they need to do more than that. We just think with things are going to be shifting so radically in the area of parking with AVs. Automated vehicles. The transit world is going to change significantly because the cost of the transit trip now is going to be about the cost of a trip that you just call the vehicle up and get in and it goes somewhere. So what does that mean for the bus? I mean, there's all these things in the future that just kind of blow our minds when you talk about, hey, we need a new plan. So to deal with the fears and the if that's what it takes, put the parking demand requirements back in. If that's what it takes. But the one hole we saw that we're actually most alarmed about is downtown and not seeing the influx down there. And that's where the target was, and that's where we're not seeing the faucet on like it is everywhere else. So I think we're more firm on those, that's a really good direction. And I think we're like, you could go either way to address parking demand or that fear or concern of the units that aren't even built yet.
Thank you.
That makes sense.
It does.
Okay.
Okay, we've got several slides that have policy suggestions, policy options, and yet what we have is one pass through on public comment. And we'd all appreciate hearing your comments on all of the different suggestions here. And we have the outside of the CBD, and this is the parking question. This is parking day. So the suggestions that have to do with the out of the CBD parking requirements, and then we have the 700 square feet. We have the 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom basket. We have the CBD activities. Understanding that we're going to have a conversation in the future about the CBD, that I call the geography session we're going to have, where we're going to be looking at how are there ways to mold AUD geographically to make it more compatible. So they overlap, obviously, but anyway, we're going to have a bite at the CBD apple in the future in a significant way. As well. But obviously there's some parking requirements. Mr. Dayton's alluded to them and as well.
Are you taking any more questions, or were you getting ready to do
I'm getting ready to do public comment.
Okay.
Yeah.
May I?
You may.
Thank you, Mr. Dayton. In your slide 20, is it consider parking maximum or parking in lieu fees? It has to be one or the other?
No. Councilmember Murillo, that's correct, because an in lieu fee is in lieu of required parking. So if the parking maximum allowance could be anything down to 0, there wouldn't be something to trade. So on the parking in lieu fee, you keep the requirement at, let's say, 1, and then you say this is what it costs to go down each space for your project.
And so for us and for the community to accept that, then the fee would have to go to something that we all agreed was valuable. Right.
Yeah, and yes, and that's, we're just scraping the surface, but what you need to think about, and this is what we don't have yet because I know Mr. Rouse is putting this together, is the parking is our main point of this presentation is parking, reducing it can drive increased housing proposals, and so the more you increase the parking in lieu fee, that will also affect the cost of a project. So you need to think about it. In the parking maximum, it's giving the highest incentive. The in lieu fee would adjust based on how costly it is per space to reduce. Did that make sense?
Okay. I guess I would like to hear, from the developers and other people what that would mean to them. When I looked at the CBD outline, I was wondering where El Pueblo Viejo boundaries were too. I mean, they exist together, right? Already. I just want to say we need to look out for our historic resources, and if I don't say it, someone else will. I'm so glad you're talking about housing downtown, because that has been what we've all been buzzing about, talking about what to do with State Street. And Mr. Cornell is sitting in the back of the room, and I asked him, what would it take to put housing in Macy's? And he had an immediate answer. So that's very exciting, and I'm so glad that you're bringing that piece into this. And the last thing I'll ask is, if we're going to look at the part where, it's the 700 square feet, if we choose some kind of quantitative, place to start, the question is, would this, if we liked this, and I'm liking it so far, would that apply to the projects that are already in the pipeline retroactively, or would we pick a date in the future and say, you know what, you have your applications already in? We've talked about that, right? We've orbited around that in this discussion. Is it fair to tell somebody who spent the money, designed something, put something in our application process, and then we tell them, hey, we need to change, you need to change it all up? So I think that's sort of the process question that I'm asking. Can we do it retroactively, and would that be our decision or the City Council's decision?
What you're getting at, Councilmember Murillo, is when does a project vest to the zoning ordinance? And the answer to that is technically the city attorney would advise that it takes place when substantial investment is made, and ultimately what we look at is construction activity. Now, one could also argue that as plans are under development, as money is going into engineering and surveying and planning, that substantial investment is being made. And so the question that you raised is a very good one, and it should be one that is discussed among the task force as we move along, because there are a number of things that you're talking about that relate to when that threshold or where that threshold should be set, and ultimately that is a policy decision made by the City Council within certain parameters.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the slides that have to do with the parking requirements, there's this one, and there was one, maybe just, if you can have those so that are those the two? Okay. So maybe you can toggle them a little bit as we talk here. So we have, 13 speakers. Obviously, the task force wants to have some time, even though we're supposed to be ending at 3. At least I've budgeted till I got to be out of here at 3:25. But hopefully we can get your comments, and then we'll have the appropriate time for the task force to chew on this as well. So starting with Tom Becker, and Matt Labrie is on deck.
Thank you. Tom Becker, representing Carver Basic. These questions refer to your supporting document about your travel demand and other travel documents. Rob Dayton's already got the questions. In fact, he said he's before. So we'll ask the questions here. We have 7, but we'll narrow down to 3 today. Number 1, how many city employees, city government employees, own homes in South Santa Barbara County? How many city government employees commute on the 101 highway through the HOV project? And how many current HOV area commuters will move to the city of Santa Barbara over the next 15 years? These are relevant questions to this, and I'll tell you why. Your plans that you've concocted, including this one, you're not planning for providing any housing so people can own their own homes, develop equity, so when they retire, they're not destitute. You're creating rental housing that when people retire, they're going to crawl on their bellies to the government for a subsidy, or crawl to someone like Rona Barrett, maybe hoping for a 1-bedroom place somewhere. This is not home ownership. This is rental housing. And that's what you created. Now, we talked to the Federal Highway Administration and other people about this, and they have some serious questions about your government and your staff and what they think they're doing. And they go, are these people planning to develop for home ownership so people develop equity? They go, no. It's all rental property. It's all you people are planning for is rental properties. That's the worst thing you can teach a young person is to rent. Young people, especially young people who need some guidance, should be taught you have to own your own home.
15 seconds.
15 seconds. I think I've said enough. But I'd like to have Rob answer our 3 questions that we submitted that we asked now. I don't think he has an answer to it because I don't think they've ever studied it. But we'll give Rob a chance.
Thank you. Matt Labrie, I apologize. I should have brought you up as you're the part of our
Mr. Chair,
fabric here.
members of the task force. I'm Matt Labrie. I'm here on behalf of the Parking Committee this afternoon. I also wanted to point out Ed France from our committee, as well as our chair, Trey Pinner, are here. Excuse me. There we go. Now I don't have to yell. Just briefly, the Parking Committee had the pleasure of receiving Mr. Dayton's report, and generally we are so excited that this topic is before you and before us, and I think that the punchline is that the Parking Committee would really like to engage in this topic and help advise you. City Council appointed the Parking Committee to help advise it on issues of parking in the downtown core. And I just want to briefly speak primarily to the PBIA area, or the Parking Business Improvement District, which is smack dab in the middle of your focus area this afternoon, to say that as the parking system was set up, over 50 years ago as a cooperative effort between the public and government, and it's a wonderful partnership, and it's set up to primarily support the interests of business and culture and the commercial activities that happen downtown in the core. That said, it'd be great, Mr. Dayton, if you could share with the task force at some point the occupancies. And we recognize that there are a lot of creative opportunities to engage in this topic because we believe that the vitality of downtown is going to depend upon your successful housing ordinance. And to embrace downtown with housing above it and around it is really going to be the key to its long-term success. Culture is changing. We need to be living downtown. Parking Committee wants to play a role in that discussion.
Great. We certainly want you to, too. Thank you for being here. All right. Glenita Ariarte. Ariarte? Is that right? I can't hear what she said.
Giving her time.
To Anna. Okay. All right. So we'll then, Anna, come on up and we'll get you too.
So I didn't have a time to actually submit this letter beforehand. I've been working on a few other things which you guys are probably aware of. I have a letter that the very first thing it talks about is the NZO. Outside of the Central Business District, our Planning Commission has actually proposed to you in the new NZO, which you guys will consider adopting, that the food services actually have a 1 by 250 square foot parking maximum for the parking requirements. Our transportation department actually doesn't even think that is a good idea. If you take a look at the information that I provided in the third paragraph, it talks about our own transportation department states that a parking ratio of 1 by 250 is the expected average parking demand on all types of restaurants in Santa Barbara. Yet the Planning Commission, as I just said, has actually voted for a 1 by 250 parking requirement. We are going to be pushing parking outside of the Central Business District, and we are going to be having growth in those areas where we're going to have restaurants that are going to become popular. They will actually have an induced demand for parking because you've got restaurant patrons that are there and residents all fighting for the same amount of parking, and it's going to create problems. And I really hope that we take this into consideration, which I don't actually see anywhere in this report, about how the new NZO is actually going to affect parking outside of the areas if these are actually adopted. The next thing is, I'm very supportive of making sure that the AUDs that have 2 bedrooms are actually going to have enough parking, but maybe they don't actually need more than one parking place if they are affordable to people that are in the low income or moderate income earners. Those people, if we can actually get them to work downtown, they may not necessarily need that parking requirement. But for someone that has an above moderate income level that maybe is living here and then traveling to Goleta and maybe has a spouse that travels elsewhere, it's kind of ridiculous for us to actually say that we're going to have these in lieu fees or anything else or reduce parking, for some of these units. The other thing that I want to mention is if you guys take a look at that map regarding the actual commercial area downtown, and then you look at the map with our vacation rentals, you have vacation rentals in the R4 and the commercial zones. People right now are already trying to turn homes in our downtown area into permanent hotels / vacation rentals. This is already happening, and this is actually going to make your problem worse. What you're saying is that we need more housing downtown, but that housing can get turned into vacation rentals. So that is a substantial problem. Regarding this in lieu fee as well, again, there is an issue perhaps in the future, which is having to do with covenants. So what happens if a unit of housing is turned into something else?
15 seconds.
If it actually is turned into something else, how is that going to work? Okay. We have to worry about that. Okay. And we should have strong covenants that's actually going to protect that. And if you take a look at the rest of my letter, it's pretty self-explanatory. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I would ask that if you can, to speak, even as part of your conversation, to speak to the specifics here on what are these particular options as part of your presentation. Keith Rivera, to be followed by Kathy McCammon.
Thank you. Would like to speak to the proposal to increase the parking requirements to 1.5 spaces per unit versus the 1. And as an illustration of that, this is a currently under construction AUD project on Rancheria Street. It's in the medium-high density, 7 units, all 2-bedroom, about 812 square feet, all 2-story. Each unit has on-grade private open space. The overall open space exceeds all the zoning requirements. And you can see parking in the center there, so imagine if you have to increase that by 50%. Where does it come from? There's only a couple choices. Either you reduce the density, which then you might as well be back to variable density. You start to chew up open space, and then people no longer have on-grade open space. Or you start to do structured parking. And so you're doing tuck-under parking, and the mass and bulk scale of the building is increasing. So kind of goes counter to increasing the parking requirements, goes counter to trying to increase housing demand, and in a way that is compatible to existing neighborhoods. So okay. I would urge you to keep the 1 unit per or 1 space per unit requirement in the medium-high density areas.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Chair. Thank you. Mr. Rivera, if I'm not mistaken, you mentioned if you had to provide additional parking, it might go back to variable density, or et cetera, which would be townhomes primarily. But wasn't this project at one time had an application in to be a variable density townhome project?
Yeah, this particular site went through a number of incarnations over the years, but there was a previously approved condominium development that was under the variable density, and I believe it only had 4 or 5 units.
So the increased density going to 7 with 1 parking requirement allowed it to be a rental project in terms of today's economics?
Correct. It also allowed it to have more open space and be smaller mass bulk and scale, essentially.
Mr. Dominguez?
So my question is, if we leave it the way it is now, where do those cars that aren't parking in the parking lot go?
I guess they either park on the street or they don't have cars, but I guess, again, if the objective is to provide additional housing as the top priority rather than housing vehicles, I would go with the single parking space. I've been designing infill housing for over 25 years, and as Mr. Dayton started his presentation saying, parking is the #1 driver of site design and infill development. And so I think it's just a matter of priority of housing people or housing vehicles, which may not even be needed in the near future with all the things that Mr. Dayton was mentioning as far as autonomous vehicles and car sharing, et cetera.
So if you had 1 fewer units there, you'd have more, you'd be able to add parking and there'd be a little more open space. So the quality of life for those residents and the neighbors would go up. So I think you're right, it's a trade-off between number of units overall in the system.
One less unit wouldn't matter. You wouldn't be able to get 6 units on here if you had to park 1.5 cars per unit.
You'd be able to get 1 or 2 more spaces if you took out that unit?
Maybe 1 space. But then, again, you're driving up mass, bulk, and scale, and you're reducing open space and livability in the process.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, Kathy McCammon to be followed by Joanna Kaufman.
Good afternoon. Kathy McCammon, and even though I'm president of Allied, I'm speaking as an individual. As to the staff report, I strongly agree that under the AUD parking options, that outside the central business district, you keep the parking that is in the staff report. The minimum of 2 parking spaces per unit with 3 or more bedrooms. The 1.5 park spaces per unit for units over 700 square feet with 2 bedrooms. The reason for this is that outside the central business district, especially when you're talking about Upper State Street near La Cumbra, there are fewer alternatives for automobile use. Then I have a question as to one thing that you said earlier, that Rob Dayton said earlier, and that is, what are you planning to do with the city parking lots that at times are full because of events happening in downtown Santa Barbara? Or does that leave people? Anyway, moving forward, as to attachment 1 on page 2, LG4, it talks about under focused growth, increased public areas and open space. Well, here again, if you look at Upper State Street near La Cumbra, there seems to be a basic conflict because the thing talks about, the staff report talks about increased public areas and open space, but currently there are no parks, no open space, so maybe if you collected impact fees or something like that, you could use that money to provide some parks and open space in that area. Then attachment 1.5, it's short-sighted in mixed-use developments only to have adequate capacity to serve existing uses, because what happens in the future, you may have other uses.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Your time is...
Another quick thing,
Okay.
on the unbundled parking, and talking about the end of fees, it seems like there needs to be more discussion on these items.
Thank you.
And I'll submit this something to you in writing.
Please, thank you. Joanna Kaufman to be followed by Cameron Gray.
Hi, thank you, Chair, Task Force members, staff. I'm here on behalf of the Coalition for Sustainable Transportation, also known as COAST. And I just want to echo something that Mr. Dayton brought up, that it's pretty well cited that transportation is going to be changing radically in the future. And so we don't want to look at things in a reactionary way right now. I think we have an opportunity to be thinking about what's going to happen in the future. And I think the best way to support the changes that are coming is to have a robust bicycle, pedestrian, and transit network. And I'm concerned, if you flip back to the outside of the CBD changes, the requirement, especially for the 1.5 spaces for the 700 square feet or 2 bedroom. And then also the boundaries of the CBD. I would like to see kind of an overlay of where the proposed bicycle plan network is going to be, where the existing transit networks are, to have a better analysis of the bikeability and accessibility with those networks. So it's hard, I think, without the additional economic study to understand what the implications would be in terms of the development potential outside of the CBD and inside of the CBD, and how those shifts are going to happen, if it will end up, ending up in development where you want it to go or where you don't want it to go. But I will say that we support the annual fee, especially to providing a steady stream of funding for bicycle pedestrian transit-oriented projects. But once again, it's still not certain how much funding will be generated from that. So I think it would be helpful once we get those numbers to see how much that would be in support.
And your time is up here.
Just have to say we support the citywide options that were proposed as well.
Great, thank you. So Cameron Gray to be followed by Eve Sanford.
Good afternoon, Chair White and task force members. My name is Cameron Gray, representing the Environmental Council. I want to thank Rob and staff for a very interesting and thought-provoking presentation. Community Environmental Council supports the development of more housing in downtown Santa Barbara, and we know that changing the parking requirements is going to be key to doing that. I've been to a lot of public meetings where we've heard from older residents who don't see the promise of living a car-free lifestyle. They're not interested in moving downtown into smaller units, but that's not who we're building housing for. And it's really important to understand that. We're building housing for millennials, people my age and younger, who are living a car-free or car-light lifestyle already. For example, imagine a newly hired Sonos employee who just relocated from the Bay Area. At her previous job, she used alternative transportation and sometimes new mobility services like Uber and Lyft to commute into the workplace. When she wasn't working, she'd walk to a coffee shop down the street or eat at a restaurant a couple blocks away. And really, in short, she was living a more or less car-free life. These are the people who are going to become the economic lifeblood of downtown in the future. Now, let's be clear, the writing is on the wall. In the current climate, retailers are struggling, and it's going to be amenities like coffee, food, culture, and arts that are really going to become the sustaining force for downtown. So it's important to move with these larger changes, we believe, and also embrace the opportunities and benefits that the changes are going to entail. And there are very compelling opportunities here. For example, Google, Apple, Uber, and Lyft are investing billions of dollars in new autonomous vehicle technologies that will fundamentally change the way we move.
Okay, and your time is up now.
Can I just say one or two more points?
Well, again, we're not going to be able to speak up here ourselves. So
Well, in closing,
It's like me. That's not fair.
For the sake of fairness,
Please
I will
concede. And you can bring us, yes, do provide written comments. Always that helps to keep the points up front. So Eve Sanford to be followed by Trish Allen.
Eve Sanford, speaking on behalf of the Santa Barbara Bicycle Coalition, SB Bike. I want to say that SB Bike supports the incentives presented today that will encourage increased residential AV housing in the downtown core. I think it's important that we provide Santa Barbara residents with a variety of housing options that support car-light lifestyles. In regards to the parking-specific options presented today, we support the parking in lieu of fee. I think it's not enough just to look at the supply of parking when we think about how people make transportation decisions. And I see the parking in lieu program as a potential to make meaningful investments in our bicycle, transit, and pedestrian networks in a way that supports active trips and car-light lifestyles. Furthermore, I think there's potential to look at how that could help with the beautification of public spaces that are in downtown, not only further support those modes. And I'll end by saying that we also support exploring the feasibility of residential parking in existing city-owned lots.
Great. Thank you. Trish Allen to be followed by Lisa Plowman.
Thank you, Chair White and House members. I'm Trish Allen with Suzanne Elledge, Planning and Permitting, and representing my company today. Really do appreciate, like other speakers have said, the staff report was very thought-provoking, and appreciate the pattern of development in our community and what has happened with parking in terms of providing additional housing. In general, we are overall supportive of the incentives to focus residential density in the central business district, and particularly, as other speakers have mentioned, to further support adaptive reuse of existing buildings to speak to the vacancies that we're experiencing in our downtown. So overall, within the Central Business District, all the items that are in the staff report, we want to, we're excited about continuing that conversation. I realize this is just the beginning of this, and there'll be more dialogue as we go along. I did speak to Mr. Dayton earlier about setting a maximum of the one space per unit in the Central Business District. And my thought about that is to consider flexibility with that. I don't believe in every instance that providing more parking would lend to additional density. It really let the particular site constraints speak to that. So just wanted to put that out there, although we are generally supportive of ideas like the parking in lieu fee and what that could provide, and further discussing that. We would very excited about the possibility of creating a fund to improve pedestrian and bike infrastructure and programs, and creating additional multi-purpose parking, all the things that we've been talking about. In terms of outside the Central Business District, I'm in agreement with what you've heard from Mr. Rivera also. I feel that increasing the parking for the two-bedroom, 700 square foot units goes in the wrong direction.
Okay.
I feel that the one space is intended to meet a demand of that smaller unit.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Lisa Plowman, to be followed by Maggie Campbell.
Mr. Chair, I have some time ceded to me. I'll try not to use it all, but
Okay.
I do have some.
By whom?
Olivia Marr.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
I just wanted to commend staff on a really interesting report. It was very informative and shed a lot of light on sort of historically how we have come to where we are today. The first thing I wanted to say was thank you, young people, for coming. I really appreciate it. I mean, we're all probably 40, 50 plus in here, and I like to see some fresh blood. The next thing I wanted to say was I think there's a couple of reasons why there is not housing happening in the CBD. One is the donut hole, which we all fondly call it that, where we didn't have higher densities there, and we didn't give them a parking incentive. So that does make some sense that those two things combined, plus going through the HLC process, which is challenging, has probably created a disincentive for building housing in that area. The second thing I wanted to say was another interesting piece of information that came out of the staff report was 73% of the units, the high density unit, or of all the units, are located in commercial zone districts. And that's what we wanted. So that's pretty great. Those are the areas that have on-street parking that's available at night that can take overflow parking from the residential units. So that's 73%. I was actually pretty impressed by that. And then I want to just talk a little bit about the proposals that were presented today. One is I'm supportive of decreasing the requirements in the CBD. I think that's a great idea. I think it will help to incentivize development. I like the idea of being able to use the vacant spaces in the parking structures, because why not? You know, it's a resource that's available to us. I'm not really sure how we work that out with an in lieu parking fee, because I do also like the idea of getting money that we can use for, but I have how many minutes for?
Oh, you would try. I'm sorry, you have another 2 minutes. Excuse me.
We can get some money for alternative transportation, because I'm a great believer in, let's be visionary about this. Let's try to develop programs that allow people to have one car. Instead of forcing the model that's old onto people, which is we're going to give you 2 spaces whether you want it or not, or 1.5, let's give the zip car option a try. And I'd actually like to see if we can work with Rob Dayton to allow the city's zip car parking program to go into private properties. So developers, like a developer I'm working with, has an extra space. Let's put a zip car in that particular project. I'm supportive of unbundling. I think that's a great idea. You know, I'd be interested in talking to some of the development community about it, but see how they would react to that. Let's see, what else was there? I do not support increasing the parking requirements, particularly in the high priority housing overlay. We spent a great deal of time identifying those areas in the commercial zone districts and in what I call sort of the greater downtown that should be able to accommodate the higher densities. And if we change the parking requirements there for the studios 1s and 2s, that will really disincentivize that housing. And it's still being developed in areas that I think can accommodate it. And I think everybody sort of let the ship sail on the 3-bedroom units. I think everybody's kind of in agreement with that, but I definitely want to keep those parking requirements at the rates that they are now.
Great. Thank you. Maggie Campbell, to be followed by Brian Kernell.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm very excited about hearing about some of these recommendations. I was at the parking committee meeting. Maggie Campbell, representing downtown Santa Barbara. I thought maybe it would be best to share some of what I've seen happen in a couple of other communities around some of these similar policies. I've worked and was involved in 3 different downtowns when there was a great deal of residential infill development. First, downtown Fort Worth. In the 90s, downtown St. Louis. Most recently, and in the early 2000s, I was running the Old Pasadena district. And when residential development was outpacing commercial development 4-to-1 in terms of return on investment, and we were seeing a great deal of development and change, and the general plan and the policies at the time really weren't keeping up with what was happening at all. I heard a few moments ago a collective moan in the room from all the staff members, and I have sympathy for you because I heard that same collective moan in Pasadena when it was time to pull out the general plan and talk about a specific plan for downtown and changing policies. But a lot was changed around parking, and I think the outcomes are very impressive. So some of the things that were done in Old Pasadena, the minimum became the maximum. We uncoupled parking. We created a zoning parking credit program, which was an introduction of in lieu fees. Those fees were dedicated to public improvements in the area. We did have a specific plan adopted for downtown. We did a mixed-use residential overlay that actually defined what mixed use is, because we had developers building wall-to-wall housing and then putting a space in on the ground floor big enough for a little liquor store or a couple of machines, vending machines. And so we really held people accountable to making sure that if they're going to build dense housing, that they really do build the residential serving retail on the ground levels, because that was the whole point of reducing car trips and not letting the developers just max out the housing without keeping the balance of commercial. We formed alliances with residential neighborhoods because the development was leaking out into all the neighborhoods around the central business district, and we found a common alliance to redirect the housing through policies into the dense, urban, walkable downtown. There was a real intent then to protect the neighborhoods, to build the right kind of mixed use, to create those kinds of options that created a rich variety of choices for consumers. Not every developer built the minimum. Some developers said, hey, I'm going for a different consumer. I want to sell, or I know the people I'm going after in my price range are going to need more parking. But it gave people much more flexibility, both the development community and the users. All of that drove a new vision for the downtown core. And I think the outcomes, I was in Old Pasadena last week for 3 hours on Thursday night. I walked the full length of Colorado Boulevard. There were 2 vacancies. It was very vibrant. It was 9 o'clock at night. All the patios were full. People were out walking their dogs, strolling their kids. You could walk a block in either direction and turn a corner, and there's 3- and 4-story, very well done residential development with neighborhood serving retail on the ground level. And I didn't see any huge parking problem. They definitely used the city parking assets at night to accommodate some of the parking needs of some of the new development. And I appreciate the opportunity to share some of those things. I am in support of many of these proposed policy changes.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell.
I have a quick question. Are you in support of a new specific plan for downtown? Is that something we're ready for?
We don't have a specific plan for downtown. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
We just have a general plan. I think that there's been a lot of conversation around the need for a new vision for downtown and kind of about what is downtown today and what's it going to be in the future. There's a lot of conversation going on about that. This issue about introducing dense residential housing, what are the policies around that? What's the vision for connectivity? I mean, it's all part of planning.
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. I'm sorry. Yes.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Brian Cornell.
Mr. Chair, before you push that button, may I make not related to the agenda, I'm going to make a quick comment. We all agree the consensus behind not allowing vacation rentals in AUDs, ADUs,
right? No vacation rentals. Now,
just do it. Just do it, okay? So accolades to Rob and Dan. I so appreciate that we're planning. This is a perfect opportunity to kill two birds with one stone. We have a serious problem in our retail core that is going to take visionary thinking. It's going to take a lot of work, but most importantly, it needs housing. We have to put people downtown, and the only reason we didn't is because of a short-sighted vision. We created this donut hole as a compromise. We have to get rid of the donut hole, allow housing downtown, implement these strategies for parking because it's the perfect place to experiment, and it will. I am convinced it will work. So good job. These units downtown are going to clearly enforce or create a new vibrancy that is gone because of the Amazon.com. As far as the count, outside, I agree with what Lisa said as far as the priority housing overlay. I don't think we should mess with the parking there because that's the housing we need. In the other zones, I think we should tweak it, just as we're going to geographically tweak the map to allow the downtown back into the AUD. I think we should, look at some of these areas where parking is a problem. Maybe it can be handled in a way that the open space is in the new NZO. In other words, perhaps it's a situation where you say the Design Review Board has the authority to impose more parking if it appears there's a parking problem in the neighborhood or there's a vast amount of people that show up. It could be that kind of a thing. So I encourage, what I love about this and the discussion is obviously we are tweaking this thing. It needs to be tweaked. This is all good stuff, and thank you for planning.
Mr. Chair, can I ask Mr. Cornell for an opinion on this top one, parking maximum or in lieu fee?
I think it's great. I think in the downtown, that's exactly the stuff we need to do. I do think, however, I am concerned about the 700-foot that limit because I just hate square footage limits like that. What if my unit is 702 square feet?
Yeah.
So I would really hesitate on that. But the 3-bedroom, I think absolutely you should create a higher parking standard for that. But this idea is fantastic.
Well, it says or. Do you like either one or?
I like both.
You like both? Okay.
Yeah. Should be both.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so that is all of our public testimony. Thank you for that. And then before we get started here at the task force, would staff like to provide any comment at this point?
I think I'd want to hear what you have to say.
Great. Okay. Thank you. All right. Mr. Olson, shall we start with you again? I think we.
Okie doke. First of all, I would like to thank the staff for doing an excellent report. I was really fascinated by the background information and the creativity and thought that went into this report. It was very, very helpful. I actually like all of the ideas that you came up with. The only concern I have is with the 700 square foot kick for the 2-bedroom unit in the areas outside the central business district. But other than that, I basically agree with all the other recommendations.
So to be clear, so you would like to maintain the one parking space for 2-bedroom units, no matter the size?
Well, I think that needs more discussion. I think it might be 750. It might be another version, but it didn't feel right when we heard from Mr. Rivera. The other option would be to just keep it at 1 unit or 1 space per unit for both 2-bedroom and 1-bedroom and studio.
Okay, thank you. Is that it?
Let me pick up on that point. We've already, one of our goals was to look at parking, and I think we've already addressed the cause of one appeal, which is the 3 bedrooms and 1-car parking. So we're making that recommendation going forward. Now we're adding something else onto it for more than 1-car parking for 2-bedroom units in certain areas. And what I'd like to point out is that after you eliminate 3-bedroom units in the mix, there's a 50-50 mix of 1-bedrooms and 2-bedrooms, both in medium-high and an overlay. It averages 1.5 bedrooms. We're providing at least 1 car. The mark or areas on Upper State Street are either proposing more than 1 car for 2 bedrooms, or it's a 1-bedroom project like 15 South Hope Street. So they're complying, or they're making the decision to provide more. But with a 50-50 product mix between studios, 1-bedrooms, and 2 bedrooms, after eliminating 3s, you have 1.5 bedrooms. You're providing a minimum of 1 car, if not more. You have commercial. A lot of these are in a commercial zone. So you're actually at a minimum providing 2 cars or more for 3 bedrooms already, based upon what the experience is on the actual type of product mix that's being produced, to look at the density and also look at design review on how many bedrooms they could get in. So I really think we should leave it the same. This is a test. There's different ways to evaluate what goes on over time. And if we start changing parking, given the result, I don't think we have a test anymore. Okay? I think you're really debilitating a lot of areas outside of the CBD or wherever we're looking at making those changes. I don't think and especially in the commercial zones, none of this should be changed. And let's see, the applicants are adapting. They're adapting to unit size already. The sizes are less than allowed, okay, that they're coming in with. You already have smaller units. And to assume that everyone's going to build a 700 square foot, 2-bedroom, 1-bath with no storage is to assume one type of product. So I think people are going to do more than that. The other thing is, if we force people into doing 1-bedrooms versus 2, more than they are now, okay, because I've seen that happen during design review, you're eliminating the ability of 2 roommates to split a $3,000 rent or $1,500 apiece versus getting a 1-bedroom or studio for $2,500. I know some people prefer that, but this is new product, and you lose that ability, and you also lose the ability to attract a young family. Right now, millennials, the peak of the millennials, or the spear, if you will, is approaching 30. Their lifestyle is starting to change. It's not all, post-college graduates. You have to provide additional opportunity for people to rent to stay in the community as a first step. So I am not in favor of any change in parking requirements for 2 bedrooms based upon some square footage or anything else. Let the test play it out. As far as downtown, agree 100%. And I think the ability to take parking out is going to help in one big feature, and that's adaptive reuse. Okay, we've got constraints on height, size, bulk, scale, but if you can combine even 27 units an acre in a redo of second floor or the back of a retail space, you'll start to get enough units in there maybe to make it economically feasible and bring down the cost. And I think if we can get the housing authority, which I think you're looking at, the possibility of that middle income, to start looking at some of these buildings and work with them, we can create lower-priced housing downtown based on the physical nature of the building that's currently existing without having to go up in the air. So I'm in favor of everything staff said in looking at providing for the central business district, but not agree that with Don, no changes to parking outside the CBD except for the change we already made, which was the biggest concern, and that's 3-bedroom units requiring 2-car parking. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Kempnell. Ms. Maria?
Thank you. So to save time, I agree with Mr. Campanella on the parking issues. I'll just add that we don't have data yet, and we've been saying that for the longest time, that until we have some units on the ground and the surveys, we really don't know what the parking impacts are. So then I would stay with the parking as it is, and the parking maximum, I think, is closer to that than going with the in lieu fees. Is that right, Mr. Dayton?
The parking maximum versus the parking in lieu fee could be either. It's
Okay.
just one, you're getting something for the reduction. You're getting the money in exchange for the reduction.
Okay. So it was easy to say 2 parking spaces for 3-bedroom units, and I do believe people will self-select. If they have 3 cars, they're not going to move into an AUD unit with 1 spot and sell their cars. So self-selecting. Let's bring housing downtown, and so glad to hear that the downtown parking people are on board. I liked your suite of citywide options. Thank you. Those were wonderful. And then just real quick to Mr. Becker, we are looking at ownership opportunities through an employer-sponsored housing program. So that was a discussion we had maybe 2 meetings ago. Thank you. Nope.
Could you clarify the suite of...
The citywide options would be exclude AUD projects from the residential parking program, require unbundled parking to allow residents to choose the parking they need, and monitor and expand the car share as warranted. It's slide number 21. There it is.
Okay.
That was the citywide ones.
Okay.
I support those. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Mr. Jordan?
Well, I admit I have more questions after listening to all this than answers. So,
all right. Good.
Rob, I need a coffee date on the how in lieu fees work and how that would all relate to either you can only get the choice of that or the maximum parking, and then how you would use city parking lots. It's clear I don't know enough about that to say something. So, what is clear on the other hand, though, is I think we're at at least in my lifetime, a unique junction in time where there's concerns in the downtown corridor, and the answer to that nestles perfectly in with where we get the biggest bang for the buck on general plan realization, parking, and congestion relief. So to let this time pass by when some unpleasant moons aren't in alignment would be certainly wrong. So I agree that that donut hole needs to be addressed and closed in a manner that works for everybody. But this process tends to work in a broad policy spectrum where my general uneasiness with this program is always site specific. It's not in a broad. You could make a broad policy spectrum and say you think it works really well, and then you walk up the street to 800 Santa Barbara Street and you say that's just not looking very good to me. So I think one of the ongoing uneasiness I have with this is either the lack of direction or lack of encouragement to either the design review boards or the planning commission to actually be able to deviate with when they feel they should, rather than adhere to policy, and specifically in site-specific areas. In terms of the bullets you have up there, I agree with what we heard about making no changes on parking requirements in the high-density overlay zones, but I would like to see some additional information, perhaps. I have no doubt that John Campanella is working on this as I speak with his little pencil on what the over and under 700 and the change to the 2-bedroom would do to projects that he's seen already. I have no idea. He'll be clamoring to give us a report back on that. So I tend to think it would be all of those are okay, but I worry that when 3 people that I think do generally a lot of these projects out there stand up and say it's going to be detrimental, that maybe it won't be okay. But so just to pick a number makes me uneasy, but I agree that most of those I've seen probably need more parking. So I'd like to hear more about that. And then I agree too with everything we've heard about short-term vacation rentals. There's a definite contradiction in the zones, particularly in downtown, but in the zones where short-term vacation rentals are allowed to be created, that we're also incentivizing housing. Both of those should not go hand in hand. We should incentivize the housing and ensure that they stay housing, rather than incentivize the housing and then also allow them to eventually become short-term vacation rentals. I think that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Mr. Dominguez?
I like the way Mr. Jordan talked about the site-specific impact. I think if all of our sites took care of themselves, the city would take care of itself. If everyone had a net zero impact on their neighbors, I think everyone would be happy. The problem is when your impact spills over into the street, or when your neighborhoods desire to not have certain things happen in its neighborhood and you stick it in other neighborhoods, and you're not concerned about the economic impact and you're not concerned about the environmental impact, I think that's devastating to the economy. We're selling out 2035 Santa Barbara for 2020 Santa Barbara. We're putting a Band-Aid on. We're building a lot of rental housing. We're sticking it in certain areas. I don't know. Can you put up attachment 3 on the, or is that not on a slide? But if you look at where a lot of the AUD projects are, they're nowhere near the central business district. And it seems like we keep conveniently losing sight of what the whole plan was. The plan was affordable workforce housing. Okay? We're getting negative workforce affordable housing. We're losing workforce affordable units. And the coastal housing conference we had last Friday, the pro-growth is his first point, everything else second, anti-regulation, even admitted to us, despite the spike in housing in Ventura County, median rents are going up. Okay, if the goal was more supply brings down rents, I haven't heard a single housing economist support that theory. In fact, every study we've looked at says when you build market-based, no affordable units built in, it actually makes it worse on the workforce. So in terms of sticking to our goals, we failed. So I think that has to be the underlying conversation when we're looking at all these. So when we're looking at these, I think if you're really focused on the CBD, a maximum parking could work, and in lieu is just absolutely mandatory. We need to build the infrastructure to get people who want to leave their cars behind to be able to. We want the safety and the convenience because that's what it's going to take, and that's going to cost a lot of money. And I think we're at the point where we need to put that forward. We spent a lot of time and energy on our bike master plan. Now we need to provide that if we're realistic about getting people to take bikes, to walk or bus. Putting them downtown will help. Everything everyone said seems like it's consistent with maybe it's time to do a new specific plan for downtown or a new general plan. Downtown wouldn't be enough just because of the impact on Milpas, the dozen or so projects that are centered on Milpas. It's the area that has the worst environmental outcomes in the city, the worst air quality, and yet at the same time has the most infants and seniors, which are predominantly impacted by the air quality. The more you have people driving around looking for parking, that's a real risk factor for these neighbors. So I'd encourage all of you to go stand at Ortega Park and look at all the construction on Salsi Puedas and imagine where all those cars are going to park that are, there's no parking there today. Go down there right now, go down there in the morning, go down there in the evening. And when those two big structures are put in, imagine where people are going to park. And again, the goal is to get them out of cars if that's what they want, but we're not doing that. We're going backwards. And maybe there's some magic there. Maybe eliminating parking, people will then have to. I don't think that's the way to go because, again, we're hurting the people who we're supposed to be helping. The problem with the parking analysis that wasn't mentioned is when you take away parking, the extra profit, a big chunk of it goes to the property owner and the developer. We had the economist who came the year before to our coastal housing partnership and explained that when you increase density and remove parking, none of that goes to the renter. So what happens is as the parking requirement goes down, the land becomes more valuable, so when someone goes to sell it, they sell it at a higher price. So the landowner becomes enriched. And I've got nothing against landowners, but what we don't want to do with our policy is to only enrich that class of Santa Barbara's population, and that's what AUD has largely done, is really given that group a windfall. So what we want to do is spread around windfalls so that everyone gets part of it. Our density, I think Mr. Peugeot left, but he talked about the density benefit of AUD. Unfortunately, what we did was we thwarted the state's bonus density plan. The state set up the system statewide where if you put in affordable units, you would be allowed to increase your density, so that encouraged affordable units, and it ended up with greater density. Well, we circumvented that. We completely ruined their intention with our AUD. No one has come in and asked for more density than we've given. So that we've taken away that incentive for affordability. I mentioned that we've done an insufficient job of setting up the infrastructure and alternative transportation. In fact, with buses, as one of our speakers mentioned, bus service has actually been dropping. Subscriptions and population riding the buses have been consistently dropping, and we haven't done enough to bolster that. And that's just going to keep spiraling down. If you're really concerned about greenhouse gas reduction, where you want to put people is not in downtown Santa Barbara. It's in downtown LA or downtown San Francisco, where they have a built-out public transportation system. Putting people in our downtown, unless it's the 43% are working downtown, is not going to help greenhouse gas emission. And I want to sit down with Mr. Gray and talk about the Sonos millennials who want to work and live downtown. I think right now it's a pretty small number, and I'd love to get more data on that. I think the 43% of people who work downtown is predominantly retail and hospitality industry, because that's just the baseline of that sector. And again, I think maybe it's the kind of thing, if we build it, they'll come, which would be great for our economy to have higher-end jobs, but it's something we just need to study before we commit to that. And just finally, like we've talked about, everything we've talked about is earth-shattering, so maybe it's time to go back to our general plan.
Thank you, Mr. Dominguez. And thank you all again. These are familiar faces, and I know that we're not near done, and you'll be back. And thank you for grinding on this whole topic with us. And thank you, staff, for those insightful comments particularly on the CBD. I think that is an area where we have an alignment all the way around. I think that we're hearing the spookiness of the retail collapse, and that the opportunity for residential development in the CBD is definitely a forefront topic, which, as I've talked about in trying to frame how this group goes forward over the next bunch of months, that the CBD piece becomes, I was talking about, we need to look at the geography of AUD as one topic, and then within that, or in addition to that a CBD conversation. What can we do to make the CBD sing in this residential context? Sounds to me like that might be an opportunity for a discussion in itself. So my own comments are that I see the less than 700 square foot option as being feasible where? On non-mixed use projects. I think that the point was made, and I think that Ms. Plowman made it, that a lot of the projects are in mixed use areas, are in commercial areas. And I think that as long as there is a bit of parking that is going with the commercial, that there are opportunities to keep the parking requirements. The 700 square foot limit, I think, doesn't need to be there. But where it's non-mixed use, and we start looking at, call them the hinterlands, the further the areas, and Mr. Dominguez commented that a lot of the projects are not in the CBD, in those areas, I think that the less than 700 square foot requirement would be a useful addition. But as I say, I would say that and I think that I'm alone. I don't know where Mr. Dominguez and I are kind of on that wavelength. I didn't hear that. There's no enthusiasm to my right on that particular topic. I don't remember where Mike comes down on that. And I'll ask you momentarily to weigh in back on that. The 700 square foot. What was the other piece? The other non-CBD pieces. They're sort of inventive ideas of how to, like the unbundling was one, excluding the AUD projects from the residential parking program. Those things make sense to me. So those are two pieces that are non-CBD elements that we have consensus. I don't know. I didn't hear, Mr. Dominguez, how you feel about those. Maybe you could weigh back in. You on 700 square foot. You on those elements. Okay. So.
May I make a motion on the citywide options then? Because I think there is some agreement there.
There is some. Okay.
Okay.
Certainly you may.
So, Mr. Beal, you wanted us to make recommendations today on these items, right?
That would be terrific, so we know what to, one, put in the minutes, and two, report back to the City Council. And so what I would suggest, actually a couple things, if I may, is to make it clear for staff, similar to what you've done in the past, to walk through a series of motions to make sure that we're clear, and you're clear among yourselves as to what you would like to recommend to the City Council. Now, with that in mind, there are a lot of items on the table here, and as we approach 3:30, we know that we may not be able to get through all of the items, and if that's the case, that's okay. We're prepared to come back again in another meeting, and we'll do a refresher. 3:20. And then we'll just move the agenda items, or the tasks that we're walking through, back 1 month, and so we'll be prepared to do that. And so there's not an urgency of time. We want to give you the opportunity to have discussion among yourselves and to get it right.
Okay.
Okay.
Before you make your motion, Ms. Marie, I'd like to I had two questions of my colleagues to my left. One was on the 700 square foot business. I don't recall what Mr. Jordan had to say on that.
I think I said
Maybe
that outside the CBD, I supported what staff put up there, as long as no changes were made in the highest density overlay section.
Okay.
But if you were outside of that, then I agreed with the over 700 and the increased 2 bedrooms, and we already made a recommendation on the 3 bedrooms.
Great. Thank you. And then,
If there's any question about where those areas are, I could put a map up.
okay. Did you?
I would say yes to all three of the bullet points. Exclude AUD projects from residential parking, require unbundled parking, and monitor, expand car share. Again, with the philosophy, we provide the infrastructure before we put in the traffic and extra cars.
Great. Thank you. All right.
Specifically address those, but those are no-brainers to me. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Could you put up a map showing what Commissioner Jordan was talking about?
So what Commissioner Jordan was talking about is in the X'd out areas, which is largely the commercial areas, except for the west downtown, would remain at 1, and then the areas that are in the lighter tan and pink would be the change. Is that correct?
Would be 1.5.
Would be the slide 12 change.
The 700 square foot inflection point. Okay. I'll go back to the other one, Mr. Dayton, please.
It was 8.
Yeah, there you go.
But I did have the caveat that I knew John Campanella was preparing a report for me to see the effect. So, but okay. I still think I can say yes.
You're in the middle of something, but I have some comments on this further. Okay.
Okay.
This reminds me a lot of variable density, which is based on size of the ground and how many units. And, this is exactly what we're trying to get away from. To arbitrarily come up with a square footage number right now without further study of what actually the mix of applications are and what that means, where they are, what they're providing, I think is making decisions without having really a basis. So we're going from a test to not even looking at what we have in the pipeline to see how that may affect things and who may already be provided parking and what the impact would be beside Mr. Rivera's impact on projects that are already in the application process. So I would suggest, I would be willing, and if somebody else would be to get an allocation of time with staff is to sit down, look at the projects in the pipeline, and before we decide on an average, is to look case by case on what's in there, what's approved, what's in application, to see what this impact could be, and whether 700 square foot is an arbitrary number, or maybe it comes out to be a true. But we don't know. And once again, we're averaging 1.5 bedrooms right now, and I don't. I think the parking should be enough, especially in commercial zones and where commercial parking is being provided. So again, I'd be happy to work with staffs to give better illustration on what that particular constraint would do. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Murillo.
Well, Mr. Chair, if Mr. Campanella is willing to take the time to do that analysis, and we don't have Ms. Lodge here today, it looks to me like we're going to have a 3-3 vote anyway. So, and if we're willing to come back a month from now, that's our rhythm, right? Is every 4 weeks we come back here? Okay. I would suggest we wait on that. But I was going to make a motion on what somebody just called the no-brainer part, right, was slide 21. Mr. Dayton, if you could put slide 21 back up, or Mr. Gullett. Yeah, thanks. So I move these options.
So I'd second that as the no-brainer guy.
Okay, so there's a thoughtful motion and second. Was there a comment?
Second. Mr. Jordan seconded already.
Yeah,
right.
Jordan. Thanks. We have a motion. Yeah, Ms. Murillo and Mr. Jordan. Comments on the motion? All right. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay. So that motion passes.
What about the CBD?
Okay. You want to make a motion on that?
I would move to approve the recommendations having to do with the Central Business District.
Second. So there's a motion.
Mr. Chair, before you, we have mentioned one thing that we've been thinking of, and I didn't realize that this would go so well, but I just want to put it.
Don't make it hard.
Is that the other option to consider, because the AUD has the sunset and things, is that the CBD has its own parking requirement, and the NZO is coming forward. So another option to think about, as you're saying, because I'm thinking you're all saying yes to this, is the how. So you could start with the yes, and then the how could be a future discussion.
Exactly. As I mentioned earlier, what is sprouting out of this for me is also the stakeholders, the landowners, agents, etc. We want a full house on that one because it's such a critical piece, but this is a good start. So and I picture us having a full-on session focused on CBD, 2 or 3 sessions in from here as our way of grappling it with the next area of next level of specificity. So, motion to basically support the concepts that the staff has laid out for modifying parking requirements in the CBD. And did we get that was Mr. Olson's motion and Mr. Dominguez the second. Any other discussion at this point? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? So that's a really neat component of today's work. All right.
May I make another motion that we ask staff to come back on the 700 square foot, I'm just trying to think of a better way to say that.
Good enough.
Okay. Item with more information and with 7 of us here to make a vote.
All right. So second. Motion to put...
and to have Mr. Campanella come back, right? That was part of...
We'll have done some more
work. Okay.
Research with staff.
I guess I can say yes to my own volunteering. Yes, the second.
Yes. Okay. All right.
So I could just paraphrase my idea there is that I would, what would help me with that would be if you cherry picked out some, I know this is the way you're going, but just so everybody knows, is you cherry pick out some case studies of existing projects and show us what the consequences would be on the ground to applying what was suggested up there, and then maybe you talk to 2 or 3 people out there and find out what financial consequences or none there would have been to that project's viability. That's what I would be interested in. Your point that it's going backwards is also cherry-picking data, because data at the time of the EIR said that the actual parking is 1.5, not 1.0 per unit. So, well, I'm just saying, so somebody can find the data for either one of those arguments. That doesn't mean it has anything to do with what's on the ground at any particular time, which is the problem. I'd appreciate more data that's actually specific to a project, and I'd appreciate it if you could not just get staff involved, but if you could the big 3 out in the audience involved to tell us how that would have screwed up their project or not screwed up their project. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Buell.
I'd like to suggest another option that you might want to consider is understanding that precisely this is one of the things that we're asking a consultant to look at in our economic feasibility analysis. It might be something that we just table for a while, and we get into the preparation as we get into the analysis going into that, which the task force and the development community will all be invited to participate in. It might be something that is worth waiting on for the time being.
Can you do that at those particular square footage numbers? I mean, you can task him with that, or you could even look at when does a square footage number adversely affect or not adversely affect that mathematics?
With the economic feasibility study and the hired consultant, we can formulate questions regarding parking in the 700 square foot questions. The stakeholders involved are welcome to submit questions. So, answer to your question, yes, we can do that.
Mr. Chair?
Okay.
Just adding on to that, I think there have been studies in the past done for the general plan where there are theoretical projects were looked at various densities. I think this would be a very efficient way to do it, because the consultant could look at actual projects compared to our ordinance. Just picking up on what Mr. Jordan said, and I think that would be a very good use of their time, because they already have things to look at the impact and involve other members of the community in what would happen if those changes were made. So
that's actually the directive of the scope, is to actually take real projects and proposed projects and review them in detail. So we can do that.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Chair, so I change my motion to what Mr. Buell suggested and what we've been discussing.
And I'd
Is that better?
appreciate hearing that quoted. I mean, I'd like to please repeat what that motion is.
I'll second that again.
That the task force defer for the time being discussion on AUD options presented on slide 12 in Mr. Dayton's presentation, and that will be deferred until we undertake that type of analysis as part of the economic feasibility study.
Okay, thank you. All right. I won't be able to support this. I think we should, with non-CBD, non-mixed use projects, I think we ought to be going forward with the less than 700 square foot piece. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. So that's a two vote minority.
You and
4-2. Yeah.
Mr. Jason. Okay. Mr. Chair, can I suggest that, Rob Fredericks and the Housing Authority have that great idea about middle income housing? Can we make that an agenda item? No, it's not AUD, right? So you sent us a letter, and it was terribly interesting. But it's not appropriate because it's not an AUD thing, right?
Well, we just might hear about middle income
utilizing AUD. Can I ask then that we have that on a future agenda?
Let's see how long this task force survives. If I've got three pieces now for the future. And first of all, before we're done, do we have any other motions at this point?
I have one more piece for the future. Would it be possible, or would people be supportive of asking staff to come back to us with what it would look like to do a specific plan for downtown, or how that would fit in with our other general plan calendaring for the next several years? Just because it seems like the CBD is such a key part to the city, and the changes we're talking about are potentially very sweeping.
Okay, I think it's,
To me, that seems like a city council policy decision.
recommendations that go to council.
Oh, okay.
And this is not much is going to happen here on that. So, and I think we could have that conversation around the CBD discussion. That could be a place to be checking in on, specific plan. You could at least guide us, describe what that is for us going forward. The pieces that I have for the future are the scoring priorities. That's an area which Ms. Flax brought up and did a great job of giving us a list of ideas about how to establish priorities. And then next is the geography of AUD, and then the CBD. So those are the three, at least, topic areas that are on my radar at this point. And we're running out of time now, but if you have other ideas about big topic areas, we don't have a lot more of these months to do this, but if you have suggestions, would you kindly email those to our staff so that we can know where we're going with this for the rest of the year. Okay, so anything else at this point? Then this meeting is adjourned, and thank you, staff.
So that's,
Sorry, I just need to.
So that slide, okay, so it's outside the CBD, so that's only 750 units. And it really only matters to that niche in the middle that's a one-bedroom that's greater than 700 square feet, because if it's smaller than 700 square feet or it's one bedroom, it's going to get the one space. So really the only,
what did you think the
only person who's screwed is building a big one bedroom, because then they're going to have to add that half a parking space. So what are we talking about? 51 bedrooms in that